Thank you all so much for joining us on this pre-monitoring session. So you all know that our Federal Programs Director, Dr. Molly Killingworth. Angela Russell is our Federal Programs Accountant. Also, too, Holly Harmon is our Federal Program Specialist, along with Eric Hohen, he's our Federal Program Specialist. And again, I'm Edward Williams, your Federal Programs Administrator. So our purpose for compliance monitoring, as you know, is our goal to support you all as you go through the monitoring process. Sometimes that can look different depending on each LEA. Sometimes it might look like a kind of hand-holding, just kind of helping you get across the finish line. Other times it could be just giving you the information and then you all just kind of run with that information. But it's our goal to partner with you all. We understand that monitoring is reflective, and throughout that reflection process, we like to identify and highlight those things that you all do well. So we want to share those good practices and also to ensure that you all follow those federal regulations. All right, here you get a chance to see that all of our programs that are being monitored. So we have everything from Title I Part A to Title II to McKinney-Vento and Equitable services to non-public schools. For all of our LEAs who went through that pilot year monitoring, so for S1 and U1, which was due in 2021, 2022, you all will only be monitored for SO2 and RS. So with our risk assessment, we use a multitude of indicators to tier LEAs. Some of these indicators could include changes in key personnel. So you could have a new superintendent or a new federal programs director. Could be findings from the last compliance monitoring review, or it could be your Title I carryover percentage, right? But we use all of these different indicators, and it allows us to tier LEAs. So once we complete their risk assessment process, LEAs are tiered into one of three groups. Right? Tier 1 would be our low risk, Tier 2 would be our moderate risk, and Tier 3 would be our high risk. If you're a low risk LEA, you will go through the documentation review. If you're a moderate risk LEA, it'll be a desk review. And if you're a high risk LEA, it'll be an on-site visit. Right, so our compliance monitoring tier process, right? So for all of my low risk LEAs, again, you will go through that documentation review. You won't have any interviews, and that sample size will be a small size. For my moderate risk LEAs, you all will go through the documentation review in addition to those virtual interviews. So you'll have any CSI, TSI, serve schools, the Title I parent interview, the central office interview, and any neglected or delinquent facilities that you all may have. And that sample size will be a moderate size. For my Tier 3 high-risk LEAs, of course, this will be an on-site visit. So some of that documentation review will happen on-site. Those interviews will happen on-site. And also, too, those interviews will include Title I service schools, non-Title service schools, non-public schools, Title I parent, central office, and neglected or delinquent facilities if you all have those. And that sample size will be a large size. All right, so now we get a chance to go inside the compliance monitoring document. We get a chance to look at some components and some technical assistance checklists. All right, so a quick guide outline of our monitoring tasks. So first thing we want to look at is that title. So it might be Title I Part A or Title II, right? We want to see the section, and that section tell us from a programmatic and a fiscal standpoint what's required, right? We see that it names the title of the component, and also too, it gives us a description of that component, right? We get a chance to see on the component 2, that is the areas grayed out. So whenever you see components like that in our compliance monitoring document that are grayed out like that, basically what it's saying is you don't need to provide any documentation, right? We can go on file, whether that's in eGov or whether that's in the AIMS portal, and find that documentation. All right, this is our required form number 2, and basically this is our narrative form, right? So with this form, you basically will answer the prompt. So it's recruiting, hiring, and retaining effective teachers, right? So you would describe some of your processes for how you recruit those teachers, right? What are some of the things you do for hiring, right? And also too, how do you retain those effective teachers? All right, required form number 3, and this deals with teacher fluency and paraprofessional supervision assurance. So with this form, we want to make sure that all teachers working in the language instruction program are fluent in English and any other language as they help students in this EEL program. All right, also too, with those instructional paraprofessionals, Any instructional paraprofessional who is employed in the language instruction program, they should be supervised by a qualified teacher, right? And that's what this form is stating. And with this form, the superintendent will print, sign, and date. All right, now we get a chance to look at the technical assistance checklist. And we have different components on our checklist. It'll give us everything from if documentation is required, if no documentation is required, and also too, we'll get a chance to look at the differentiation between low, moderate, and high risk. So with component 1.1, comprehensive English learning plan, we see that no documentation is needed for this component. Component 1.2, that English fluency of teachers and paraprofessional supervision, we see that's the ALSDE required form number 3 with the superintendent signature. Component 1.3 is our English learner professional development. And with this, we see some of the things we need for that professional development. So everything from agendas to sign-in sheets to advertisements to PowerPoints to handouts and feedback. Also, too, with component 1.4, this is our least restrictive environment. And we know with this, some of that evidence can include completed IELPs and teacher and student schedules. Now we get a chance to see the differentiation between low, moderate, and high risk. So if I'm a low-risk LEA, no additional documentation is required. If I'm a moderate risk LEA, it's one sample from 2 schools selected by the LEA. If I'm a high-risk LEA, it'll be one sample from 4 schools selected by the LEA. Note, if a high-risk LEA has fewer than 4 schools, then you will provide documentation for all of those schools in the district, okay? Here we get a chance to look at our compliance monitoring timelines. What happens? So 5 weeks out, we'll send you all the initial email. And on this initial email, it'll have the compliance monitoring document, it'll have those technical assistance checklists, and then it has those required forms. All right. 3 weeks out, we will go into Cognia to assess everything you uploaded into Cognia. All right, 2 weeks out, we'll send that second email, which includes inventory, expenditure, and interview selection. And the week of monitoring, that Monday, all documentation must be submitted, right? And you get a chance to see a sample of that here. So we have a sample school going through this process. The monitoring date is November 4th, 2025, right? That 5-week email goes out 9/30/2025. Everything must be submitted into Cognia. You see that date is October 14th. As you see, the second email going out October 21st, and it includes the inventory, expenditure, and interview selection. And that Monday, the week of monitoring, everything has to be submitted. All right. All right, here we get a chance to see the different types of documentation. So if it's fiscal or programmatic documentation, what am I providing? Okay, so for all of my fall monitoring LEAs, so that's everybody from August through December, right? You will provide fiscal year 2025 documentation, right? So all your fiscal documentation will be 2025, right? For my spring monitoring LEAs, so from January to May, you will provide fiscal year 2026 documentation, right? And all of your programmatic documentation is the same, and it's based on the school year, which would be 2025, 2026, right? And below you see 2 examples of that, all right? Now we get a chance to walk through some of the documents in the compliance monitoring manual, right? So everything from common compliance to Title I to Title II to McKinney-Vento and Equitable services to non-public schools. All right, here, common compliance section 1, financial and compensation management, component 1. So in component 1, we get a chance to look at your financial and accounting manual. And in that manual, you all should have certain procedures in there. So everything from accounting to budgeting procedures, right? Everything from how you all track expenditures to report expenditures. Everything from allowability to how you all segregate financial duties, right? So all of these procedures, you want to have something in place for these procedures. And a lot of times, LEAs don't have a written and accurate procedural for these particular things. They might be kind of going through the process and doing everything, but they don't have anything written down. So we want to make sure that you all have a written and accurate procedure for each one of these components. All right, so when looking at segregation of duties and checks and balances, get a chance to see that differentiation. So if I'm a low risk LEA, no documentation is needed, right? So it's just those procedures. If I'm a moderate risk LEA, it'll be one purchase order showing segregation of duties or one compensation payroll check showing segregation of duties, right? If I'm a high risk LEA, it'll be two purchase orders examples, right? Or two compensation payroll check examples. So if I'm a high risk, two purchase orders and two compensation, right? So with a total of four, right? And basically that segregation of duties is making sure that multiple people sign off on purchase orders or that compensation payroll check, right? So it may be a federal programs director who signs off on it, and also too, your superintendent signs off on it as well, all right? So looking at reconciliation, if I'm a low risk LEA and moderate risk LEA, no additional documentation is needed. If I'm a high risk LEA, right, looking at the reconciliation process, I'm looking at budget and compensation reconciliation, right? So from the previous and current fiscal years, right? So a total of 2 months. So one from the previous year, one from the current year, all right, for cash management. For my low risk and my moderate risk LEAs, no additional documentation is needed. For my high risk, we want to make sure that you all have evidence that the LEA does not retain amounts of interest greater than $500. And this is for the previous and current fiscal year, so a total of 2 years. Component 2, allowability compliance, right? In component 1, we have all of our procedures. In component 2, are we in compliance with those procedures? So this is what we're looking for in 2. So let's talk about the types of documentation that will be submitted in component number 2, right? So first we have those budget analysis reports. We have those detailed general ledger reports. And we also have time and effort samples. Now, if I'm a fall monitoring LEA, for all of my title funds, so everything from Title 1 to Title 2 to Title 3 to McKinney-Vento, right? That will be FY 2025 documentation. So it'll be FY 2025 budget analysis reports, FY 2025 detailed general ledger reports, right? If I'm a spring monitoring LEA, right? So from January to May, for all of my title funds, it'll be FY 2026 financial documentation. So FY 2026 budget analysis reports, FY 2026 detailed general ledger reports, all right? For RBESA State Reserve, RBESA Homeless 1 and Homeless 2, it'll be FY 2024, all right? So the same thing, 24 for those budget analysis reports and also those detailed general ledger reports. All right, for ESSA1 and Get 1, it'll be FY 20 through FY 23 fiscal documentation. And ESSA2 and ESSA2 State Reserve, it'll be FY 21 through FY 2024 documentation, right? And we also get a chance to see the differentiation between low, moderate, and high as it relates to time and effort samples. So if I'm a low risk LEA, procedures only, no additional documentation is needed. If I'm a moderate risk LEA, it'll be one sample from each fund source. If I'm a high risk LEA, it'll be 4 samples from each fund source. Now, when we get a chance to assess your budget analysis reports, we want to make sure that those reports match the approved EGAP application, right? So for each functionality code, they should match what you all have in EGAP, right? We're also looking at that 10% variance, making sure that you all don't exceed that. When it comes to the detailed general ledger report, we will go in and select expenditures, and also too, we will go into the application and see if those expenditures are in the application, and also too, see if those are allowable, right? So we're doing all of those things in component 2, allowability compliance, all right? All right, so component 3 and 4, maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity, no additional documentation is needed for these 2. All right, component 5, supplement, not supplant. Right, we want to make sure that the LEA demonstrates that all federal funds are used to supplement and not supplant for each applicable grant, right? So for Title I Part A school level documentation, what we need is the gross employee salary report in an Excel document for everyone in the district, all right? We need that in an Excel document for everyone in the district. All right, so section 2. right? District level documentation. So what we need is your Title I, Part A, supplement, not supplant procedure / methodology. So if I'm a low risk or moderate risk LEA, it'll be procedure / methodology. If I'm a high risk LEA, it'll be those procedures / methodology, and also two examples of how the LEA follows those procedures and methodology. Okay. All right, Section 3, all other Title I programs accepted by the LEA. So if you all have Title II, Title III, right, Title V, again, we just need those procedures for how you all supplement, not supplant, right? So for my low and moderate risk, those are just procedures, right? If I'm a high risk LEA, it'll be the procedures, and also one example per funding source of how you all follow those procedures, right? All right, component 6, continuation of compensation during COVID closures, all right? So this component is non-applicable for you all. So you all do not have to provide any documentation for continuation of compensation during COVID closures, okay? So no documentation is needed for component 6. All right, component 7, teacher and paraprofessional qualification requirements. So with this, we can go into the AIMS portal and look at the documentation for all your teachers. So you don't have to provide any documentation for your teachers. With your paraprofessionals, all of your instructional paraprofessionals who are coded as a 101, who work in a Title I school, or who are paid with federal funds, they need to meet their qualification requirements, right? So how can they meet these? They can have a college degree. Right? They can have 48 semester hours on the college transcript. They can have the work keys, which include applied math, business writing, and workplace documents. Okay? So those are the 3 things from a documentation standpoint that you all can provide for those instructional paraprofessionals. All right, component 8, record retention policy. So with this, we just want to make sure that you all maintain programmatic and fiscal records for at least 5 years, but this technically will be in component 1 in your financial and accounting manual. So with all your other procedures, this will be there. So technically you don't have to provide any documentation in component 8 for that. We will go to component 1 and review that in component 1. With 9 audit reports, we will go to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse and look at your documentation for those single audit reports and all of that information. So you don't have to provide any documentation for component 9. All right, section 2, procurement management. Component 1, this is your procurement policy, right? So with this, we want to make sure that you all have some accurate and current written procurement policies, right? And as you can see below, what's needed in that procurement policy. So we have those general procurement standards, right? We have those competitive procurement procedures, including micro purchases, right? Simplified acquisition purchases, formal procurement, right? We have everything from oversight of contractors to cost price analysis to contract provision procedures, right? So all of these must be in your procurement policy. And also too, some type of conflict of interest policy. So that needs to be in there as well for component number 4. All right. All right. Component 2, evidence of procurement compliance. Now we have our procedures in component 1. We want to make sure that we are compliant with those procedures in component 2. All right. So everything from oversight of contractors to a full and open competition, right? So we want to see all those things. So looking at oversight of contracts, right? We get a chance to see the differentiation again. So for all my low and moderate risk LEAs, no additional documentation is needed. For my high risk LEAs, it'll be 4 examples of contract oversight, right? Which that can include purchase orders signed by ordering and receiving personnel, also signed package slips or time cards for contract services, right? But my competitive procurement, cost price analysis, and contract provisions, if I'm a low risk LEA, procedures only, no additional documentation is needed. If I'm a moderate risk LEA, it'll be 1 purchase order / completed bid packet for construction or one purchase order, completed bid packet for non-construction. All right. If I'm a high-risk LEA, it'll be one purchase order, completed bid packet for non-construction, one purchase order, completed bid packet for construction, and also one purchase order, completed bid packet for telecommunication services. For non-competitive procurement, for my low-risk and moderate-risk LEAs, no additional documentation is needed. For my high-risk LEAs, it'll be 2 examples of non-competitive procurement or a statement basically saying that all your procurement is competitive. All right. Section 3, equipment and technology property management. Component 1, this is your property management policies / procedures, right? You want to make sure that you have, again, those written and accurate procedures. So everything including disposal procedures, right? If something is lost or stolen, obsolete or damaged, from safeguarding to inventory management procedures to maintenance, right? To those annual inventory procedures. We want to make sure that you all have something in place for each one of these procedures. All right, component 2, evidence of property management compliance, and component 3, inventory records. With this, we want to make sure that you all have inventory records basically showing that a physical inventory was conducted within the past 12 months, right? So what does that look like? Is it something that you all have a third party come in and actually perform that physical inventory? All right, or it could be something that you all kind of do in-house and have different personnel go out to schools and perform that inventory. So what is your process? We need to see that evidence of that. Also, too, with the inventory spreadsheet, we want to make sure that it includes all the requirements from Equitable. So everything from the description of item to serial number to funding source, including FAME, the title holder, acquisition of date, the cost, location, use and condition, and also that disposal data. Okay. Section 4, evaluation of federal funds and programs. Component 1 and 2, so evaluation of federal funds and programs, and also 2, district level support. No documentation is needed for these 2, okay? All right, also with component 3, COVID relief evaluation, stakeholder feedback, and access to applications or plans. No additional documentation is needed for this as well. All right, so you do not have to provide documentation for these written evaluations, okay? Component 4, self-monitoring policies / procedures. So with this, we want to make sure that you all have something in place for how you all monitor yourselves before we come in and monitor you all. So what is your check and balance system? Is it a calendar system where you have everything for each particular month of the year? Is it a personnel responsible list where you list the person responsible and the duties that they have? Is it some type of start to finish procedures? All right, so we just want to make sure that you all have something in place for how you all monitor yourself before we actually come in and monitor you all. All right, section 5, enrollment of students. All right, so component 1, our board approved enrollment policy. And we want to make sure that we have a board approved enrollment policy admitting those students in those special subgroups. So those English learners, right? Foster care, homeless, immigrant, and migrant students. We want to make sure that that is included in that board approved enrollment policy. Also, too, we want to make sure that we have the documentation for the registered professional development on enrollment of special subgroups. So in that professional development, we need to see everything from agendas to sign-in sheets to advertisements to PowerPoints or handouts and any feedback or questions that you all have. All right, component 2, that enrollment packet. We want to make sure that you all have a process that basically provides no barriers for students of those special population subgroups. So again, in those English, those enrollment packets, we will look for the enrollment packet in English and also one additional language. Inside that enrollment packet, we must see the home language survey, the student questionnaire, the parent employment survey, all right? And also we get a chance to see the differentiation between the evidence of immediate enrollment of the special subgroups. So if I'm a low risk LEA, no additional documentation is needed. If I'm a moderate risk LEA, it'll be one sample from any school in the LEA. If I'm a high risk LEA, it'll be one sample from any 3 schools in the LEA.
Okay, we're going to jump right into Title I, Part A. Keep in mind that Title I, Part A focuses on improving the academic achievement of our disadvantaged students. For component 1.1, which is academic standards and assessments, no additional documentation is needed in Cognia. For component 2, English learner identification and assessment. For this component, we are looking for a sample of home language surveys from permanent files or electronic files. For our low-risk LEAs, no additional documentation is needed. We will look at the enrollment packet submitted for Common Compliance 5.2. For our moderate risk LEAs, we need one sample per grade level from any school in the LEA. One per each grade at your selected school. For your high-risk LEAs, we need one sample per grade from any 3 schools in the LEA, and then we need one per each grade from each school. All right, for component 3, this is English learner parent communication. The LEA will supply documentation that they communicate with parents. For this documentation, we need evidence of parent notification letters for EL learners with the student identifying information redacted prior to submission. We also need evidence of the English Learner Parent Advisory Committee meeting documents, as well as English learner and community outreach samples. Some of these outreach samples might include emails, phone logs, translated flyers, translated social media posts, and so on. All right, for these meetings, we need documentation for the Parent Advisory Committee meeting. We need to see an agenda, sign-in sheet, advertisements, which must be translated to meet the needs of the English learners within the LEA, as well as PowerPoint, any handouts, feedback, or questions. All right, for section 2.1, this is the Parent and Family Engagement Policy Review. No additional documentation is needed in Cognia. For component 2, meaningful consultation with stakeholders. So we want to see that meaningful consultation took place with parents and stakeholders to develop the Parent and Family Engagement Policy, School Parent Compact, and use of parental and family engagement funds. We want to see that they had input on all of those things. For the documentation, we need evidence of the district federal programs at Parent Advisory Committee meeting. And we need to see that there's flexibility there. So 2 meetings occurred, is showing flexibility for our working parents, and then with 2 different platforms. We also need documentation of local school Title I Parent Advisory Committee meeting. We need documentation of local school annual Title I parent meeting. With all of these meetings, we need the agenda, sign-in sheet, advertisements translated, and then the PowerPoints and feedback. So for low-risk LEAs, we only need the district federal programs documentation. For moderate risk, for the advisory meeting and the Title I parent meeting, we need 2 samples from one school that you select. Keep in mind that a different school must be selected for each meeting sample. For our high-risk LEAs, we need 2 samples from 3 schools selected by the LEA, both for the advisory meeting and the Title I parent meeting. Again, a different school should be selected for each meeting sample. Also, keep in mind that flexibility, that's very important. They should be offered at multiple times and through multiple methods to accommodate all the stakeholders within the LEA. All right, for component 3, it's our ASIP, Parent and Family Engagement Policy, as well as School Parent Compact requirements and availability. So we need documentation showing the pathway on the LEA website to the district parent involvement policy. So you actually will not be submitting anything into Cognia here. We'll go look for these. For We also need to see the pathway on the LEA website to the local school ASIP, parent involvement plan, and school parent compact. So all required local school Title I Part A documents must be available in English and one additional language. So we'll be looking for English and then one additional language of each of these. We also need to see signed copies of the local school parent compact. So these samples, again, should have the student identifying information redacted. For low-risk LEAs, no additional documentation will be needed. We'll be reviewing the Title I Part A documents. For moderate risk, for the pathway, we will look for 2 Title I Part A schools selected by the LEA, and then 1 school parent compact signed per grade level from any school in the LEA. And then for high risk, there should be a pathway to the required documentation for any 4 Title I Part A schools selected by the LEA, and 1 school parent compact signed sample per grade level from any schools in the LEA. If the LEA has fewer schools than the required documentation for all the schools, we need documentation of all the schools within the LEA. All right, for component 5 and 6, 5 is the school-wide and or targeted assistance program, and then 6 is the Title I Part A application. You do not have to submit any additional documentation in Cognia. We will be looking at EGAP for that information. For component 7, this component deals with the right to know letter dissemination as well as the 4-week teacher notification letter dissemination. We need to see documentation of both of these. For our low-risk LEAs, we only need to see the procedures for both the right to know letter dissemination as well as the 4-week teacher notification letter dissemination. For moderate risk, we need documentation from 2 schools selected by the LEA. For high risk, we need documentation from 4 schools selected by the LEA for both letters. Component or section 3, component 1 is comparability, and section 3, component 2 is carryover limitation. We do not need to see any additional documentation in Cognia, but we will be looking for evidence for the carryover limitation that the LEA did not carry over more than the allowable 15% limit on carryover. All right, for section 3, component 3, we're looking at school-wide and or targeted assistant program expenditure linked to ASIP. So you do not have to submit any additional documentation in Cognia. We will look in Cognia at the diagnostics tab. We will be looking at the budget analysis report section, the coordination of resource section, and then the ASIP plan budget section to see if the budgets within those components match what's in EGAP. So for low risk LEAs, we will select 1 and look at those 3 things. And then for moderate risk, we'll select 2. And then for high risk, we'll select 4. Keep in mind, if the LEA has fewer schools than the required documentation, we will review all schools within the LEA. All right, jumping over to preschool, Title I Part A preschool for components 1 and 2. We have the preschool required documents and the multiple selection criteria. No additional information is needed in Cognia. For component 3, this deals with standards for preschool. We need a statement indicating which standards are used in the Title I Part A preschool program. For component 4, equal access, we need documentation of a rank order spreadsheet if random selection process occurred. If not, then we need a statement stating that no random selection process was needed. All right, for component 5 in preschool, we need documentation of outreach. So we need 2 advertisements provided to parents about enrolling in the Title I Part A preschool program. And keep in mind that those need to be translated to meet the needs of all stakeholders. All right, jumping over to foster care for components 1 and 2, collaboration and point of contact, as well as the foster care plan. No additional documentation is needed in Cognia. And then you have Title I Part C funds, the Migrant Education Program. For components 1.1, the Parent Employment Survey. No additional documentation is needed for this component. For the programmatic requirements for migrant education, for section 2.1, the comprehensive needs assessment and service delivery plan, as well as equitable access to services, no additional documentation is needed. And then for component 3, eligibility for services. We will need to see a timeline for service eligibility of migrant students. So some possible points for this timeline might be parent employment survey, certificate of eligibility, enrollment or withdrawal of students. For component 4 for migrant education, this is the student records. We need to see documentation of the procedures for the transfer of student records for migrant students in state and out of state. For component 5, priority for service, we'll need to see a checklist of criteria used for priority for service. For component 6, professional development for the migrant education program, no additional documentation is needed. For section 7 or component 7, parent engagement, we need to see documentation that a migrant parent advisory committee meeting took place. Please provide an agenda, sign-in sheet, advertisements that are translated as well, PowerPoints, handouts, feedback, or minutes that you may have from the meeting. And for component 8, this is the recruitment. We need to see documentation of migrant student recruitment procedures. All right, lastly, for Title I, this is Title I Part D. This is the neglected or delinquent program. So if you have these funds for coordination of services for component 1, we need to see documentation of an NA for LEAs that only operate an alternative school program, or LEAs must submit the following documentation: communication evidence between the facility and the LEA, evidence of transition assistance, professional development agendas, lesson plans including standards, list of parent involvement activities or resources, and then a list of local, state, and other federal funds used to provide service to NRD students. Also, for our NRD students, for component 2, which is traditional and academic services, we need to see a documentation list of current traditional and supportive services used to support these students. Some examples of services might be mental health, social services, academic services, and others. We also need to see a support list of services used for our NRD students. Examples might include partnership agreements, expenditure reports, and pre and post test data. For component 3, this is the Title I Part D application. We will look at EGAP at that application if you have Title I Part D funds.
All right, moving on to Title II Part A. This title discusses supporting effective instruction. You'll see that no documentation is required to be submitted for this component, but what we'll be looking for in your approved application is the following narratives: comprehensive and targeted support, professional development, and stakeholder consultation. Now for component 1.2 for Title II, this pertains to the recruitment, hiring, retaining, and access to effective and non-traditional teachers. So some of the evidence we'll be looking for, we're going to show and look for those that develop and implement initiatives to assist in recruiting, hiring, and retaining effective teachers. Also to recruit qualified individuals from other fields to become teachers, principals, or other school leaders. and also to provide students from low-income families and minority students with greater access to effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders. Now, the documentation that is going to be submitted for this component is that required form number 2 that we discussed earlier in the presentation. Moving on to section 1.3, discussing class size reduction teachers. The subgrantee ensures that all class size reduction teachers are supplemental and not the only teacher at a particular grade level or subject area. Notice for this component that there is no documentation to be submitted, but however, us at the ALSDE will use the Ames portal and the gross employee salary report provided in Common Compliance Component 1.5 to check all class size reduction teachers paid with Title II Part A funds. Now, if the monitoring team is unable to verify the class size reduction of a teacher, it's possible that additional documentation will be requested. Moving on to Title III Part A, which deals with language instruction for English learners and immigrant students. You'll see that for this component 1.1, the Comprehensive English Learner Plan, this is all the evidence that we'll need that's in the approved application in EGAP. We'll be looking for the identification of placements, as well as the program exit and monitoring. So again, no documentation is required to be submitted in Cognia for this one. For component 1.2 under Title III, this discusses English fluency of teachers and paraprofessional supervision. So we are trying to assure that all teachers in any language instruction program for EL students are fluent in English and in any other language used for instruction, including having written and oral communication skills. We also want to assure that instructional paraprofessionals work under the supervision of a qualified teacher. And the required component for this, you'll see the screenshot of this, and this was discussed earlier in the presentation. This is required form number 3 that lists the superintendent name and signature with the dates. For component 1.3 for Title III, this discusses the English learner professional development. So the subgrantee provides professional development that is aligned with ESSA, and we are looking for the following required documentation: agenda, sign-in sheets, advertisements, PowerPoint or handouts, and any feedback from that meeting. Moving on to the next component, 1.4, this pertains to the least restrictive environment. And the subgrantee provides English language instructional services in the least restrictive environment possible, and with comparable facilities and materials for those used for non-EL students, and also does not transport EL students to other facilities for academics and support. For this component, we are looking for samples that have student identifiable information redacted, and some samples include completed IELPs, teacher and student schedules. Now, this one is based off of your risk level. If you are low risk, there's no additional documentation. Those procedures will be checked in Title III Part A, Component 1.1. If you are a moderate risk, you will supply 1 sample from 2 schools. And if you are high risk, you will supply 1 sample from 4 schools selected by the LEA. And again, just as a reminder, if your LEA has fewer schools than the requirement, you will need to supply documentation for all of the schools within your LEA. And also, we at the ALSDE will review the AIM portal to check to ensure English learners have access to special education, gifted education, advanced placement, and career tech programs. For section 1.5, dealing with exiting and monitoring, we're going to be checking for exit forms, and we are also going to be checking for English Learner 4-year monitoring forms. For both of these, again, be reminded that any student identifiable information is redacted prior to your submission of this documentation. And again, this is also based off of your risk level. If you are low risk, there's no additional documentation. Those procedures are going to be checked in Title III Part A, Component 1.1. And then if you are moderate risk, you will supply 1 sample from 2 schools. And if you are high risk, you will supply 1 sample from 4 schools. Moving on to section 2 of Title III, this is component 2.1. You'll see here that this one is grayed out. There is no additional documentation to submit for this. Everything will be application-based and will be pulled from your approved Title III application. Component 2.2, though, for Title III, this deals with parent notification. So the procedures that are in place to allow parents and guardians the opportunity to waive supplemental Title III services. We are looking for those procedures, and we are also looking for that waiver form. And if you are low risk or moderate risk, there's no additional documentation required. But if you are high risk, we are going to ask for 4 samples of supplemental services waiver forms. Now, if the LEA has fewer English learner students waive supplemental services, documentation for all waived students should be provided. Now, you'll see in this presentation, we discussed Title IV Part B, 21st Century Community Learning Centers program. But for this year's monitoring cycle, this is something that we will not be checking for. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to Title V. For Title V Part B, this deals with our rural low-income school program. And for this first component, 1.1, no additional documentation is required to be submitted to Cognia. This is all, again, application-based. So we will be looking at your approved Title V application in EGAP. And for Title VI Part A, this title deals with Indian education. And the programmatic components for Title VI Part A funded programs, we have to make sure that you have an approved Title VI Part A application from the U.S. Department of Education, including all required components and supporting documentation. So the documentation that is required to be submitted into Cognia under 1.1, we're looking for the most recent Title VI Part A U.S. Department of Education approved application, and then these 4 evidences of implementation. We're talking the comprehensive program for American Indian Alaska Native students. And again, this must match what is approved or what is in the approved application. We are also going to be looking for the coordination of services, professional development, the public hearing requirements, and also the meaningful consultation with tribes. And you'll see that all of these elements should be aligned with what is currently in your approved application for Title VI Part A. Again, based off of the risk level, you'll see low risk has no additional documentation. Moderate risk has to provide 2 samples of program implementation. High risk has 4 samples of program implementation. Some examples of that: tutoring logs, inventory records, time and effort samples. Now, you'll see the check boxes below. We're looking for the agendas, sign-in sheets, advertisements, PowerPoints or handouts, and any feedback related to that presentation meeting. And then the required documentation for the public hearing, again, agendas, sign-in sheets, and then add any advertisements and or public notice documentation.
All right, now McKinney-Vento homeless program. This is section 1. This is a requirement for all LEAs. Component 1, coordination of Title I and McKinney-Vento. And with component 1, we just want to see how you all coordinate those funds, Title I and McKinney-Vento, to support those homeless children and youth. All right, so we want to see those procedures. And also, 2, we want to see evidence of coordination between Title I and McKinney-Vento. So if I'm a low or a moderate risk LEA, it's procedures only. No additional documentation is needed. For my high risk LEAs, it'll be 4 samples of coordination between Title I and McKinney-Vento. And those could include invoices, receipts, pictures, or tutoring logs. It could be inventory records or time and effort samples. All right, component 2 is the homeless liaison. And with this, we want to make sure that you all have contact information for that homeless liaison. So we need a name, a position, a phone number, and an email. And also, 2, we need that job description for the homeless liaison. Component 3, this is your homeless education policy and procedures. And with this, we want to make sure that you have accurate and current written homeless education procedures, which include everything from identification to how you all report the data, to unaccompanied youth identification, to intrastate and interstate records, access to services, transportation, how you all disseminate homeless information. So we want to see all of those things inside of your homeless education policy. Component 4 is the enrollment professional development. With component 4, no additional documentation is needed. We will go to common compliance component 5.1 in that enrollment for the register PD and look at the documentation there. All right, so once you upload it in 5.1, that will account for 5.1 and also component number 4 in McKinney-Vento. Component 5 is our dispute resolution. We want to make sure that you all have a written dispute resolution policy. And what we want to see is we want to see a sample letter of how you all communicate those enrollment decisions, right? So that could be a form letter or it could be a redacted letter. Component 6, coordination of resources. With this, we want to make sure that you all have a list of collaborative efforts with those local agencies. So whether that's your churches or your local food drives or your homeless shelter, we just want to see how you all collaborate with those agencies. Component 7, school of origin transportation. And with this, we want to make sure that you all have some type of evidence and documentation for transferring those homeless students. So if you all do transport any homeless students, you can use the transportation spreadsheet, right? Where you identify certain things on that spreadsheet. If you all don't transport any students, you're going to provide a statement basically saying that you all do not transport any homeless students at this time. Component 8 is our student records. With this component, no additional documentation is needed. We will go to component 1.3 in that homeless education policies and procedures and look at those procedures there. So again, no additional documentation is needed for component 8. Component 9, professional development. So here we want to see that homeless professional development documentation. So everything from the agenda to the sign-in sheet to advertisements, PowerPoints or handouts, and any feedback or minutes that you all may have. Component 10 is our parent engagement. And with this, we want to make sure that you all have a process of how you all inform parents of homeless children and you about resources applicable for their children. So if this is homeless education flyers, do you all post these flyers on the website? Are they posted throughout the community? What is your process with this information? All right, section 2. This is requirements for McKinney-Vento LEA recipients. All right, so component 1, this is just the homeless application and no additional documentation is needed for component 2.1. Component 2.2, this is the implementation of McKinney-Vento homeless RFA application. So with this, we need to see that evidence of implementation, right? And this could be anything from invoices to receipts to pictures to tutoring logs to inventory records and time and effort samples. We get a chance to see the differentiation between the low, moderate, and high risk. So if I'm a low risk LEA, no additional documentation is needed. If I'm a moderate risk LEA, it'll be 2 samples of that program implementation. And if I'm a high risk LEA, it'll be 4 samples of program implementation.
Okay, our last section is equitable services to non-public schools. So for equitable services, for documentation, we need documentation each year of the intent to participate forms for all eligible non-public schools, or contact logs for all eligible non-public schools where the intent to participate forms are not available. So if they are not available, the contact log must show a minimum of 3 attempts through 2 different methods. If ESSER 1 and GEAR 1 funds were used, we need the intent to participate forms for all eligible non-public schools, or again, the contact logs with those same minimum requirements. For component 2.1 with equitable services, this is the equitable services policies and procedures. We need to see the following policies and procedures: timely and meaningful consultation, development of equitable services implementation plan, secular, neutral and non-ideological policies, inventory, monitoring, no charging of non-public school stakeholders for any services, control of funds, control of materials, control of equipment, personnel and services, ongoing consultation, and compliant procedures. For component 2, which is timely and meaningful consultation, we need to see the initial consultation meeting documentation that happens yearly. And then also for ESER 1 and Gear 1, initial consultation meeting should happen as well. So for these meetings, we need the same pieces of evidence: agenda, sign-in sheets, advertisements, handout or materials, and then feedback or minutes. For component 3, for equitable services, this is calculation of poverty. For Title I, we need evidence showing the method used to calculate poverty data at all participating non-public schools. Some examples might be proportionality worksheet, free and reduced lunch information, or surveys that you created with the results. If ESER 1 and Gear 1 funds were used, we need the same evidence showing how the poverty rate was calculated. All right, for component 2.4, this is the serve students for equitable services. We need documentation for Title I Part A of multiple selection criteria, rank order spreadsheet, and then the exit criteria as well. For component 5, no documentation is required to be submitted, and Claudia will look at the EGAP application. If ESER 1 and Gear 1 funds were used, we need to see the final ESER and Gear 1 Equitable Services Implementation Plan that was signed by the LEA in each non-public school. For component 6, this is the evaluation. We need to see equitable services evaluation for all applicable funds for each non-public school, and as well for ESER 1 and Gear 1 if those funds were used. For component 7, we need to, this is ongoing consultation and monitoring. We would like to see evidence of ongoing consultation and monitoring for each participating non-public school. So for low risk, no additional documentation is needed. We will look at the procedures provided in equitable services component 2.1. For moderate risk LEAs, we would like to see 2 samples of ongoing consultation and monitoring. And for high risk, we would like to see 6 samples. These samples might include an agenda, sign-in sheet, calendar invitations, meeting notes, meeting minutes, emails, phone logs, and others. All right, for component 8, this is evidence of equitable services property management and control of equitable services compliance. We will be looking at the yearly physical inventory, and no additional information is needed in Cognia. This is provided in Common Compliance 3.2. And the last component is service providers for equitable services. We need evidence of the implementation. So this must match the narratives from the Equitable Services Implementation Plan. For low risk, no additional documentation is needed. For moderate risk LEAs, 2 samples from 1 non-public school selected by the LEA. And then for high risk LEAs, 2 samples from 3 non-public schools selected by the LEA. Some examples of these samples might include invoices, receipts, pictures, tutoring logs, inventory records, and time and effort samples.
Please feel free to contact us if you all have any questions or concerns moving forward. I know it could seem like a lot of information was presented today just about the monitoring process and just going over every component of that technical systems checklist. But if, you know, in your pre-planning, if you all have any issues, just kind of jot those down and you can kind of email us or call us and we'll be able to support you all. We'll have a brief break. Right now it's 3 o'clock. We'll come back at 3:05 and we'll start our Q&A. We'll start with the questions in the chat. And after we go through all of those questions in the chat, we'll just open it up. And if you all have any questions or concerns, you can ask your questions. So we'll take a brief break right now. All right, thank you all for that brief break, and we'll go ahead and get started with the Q&A with the questions in the chat. All right, so the first question was, are we okay by uploading this statement and checklist 22? So basically the LEA does not have any private schools. So if you all do not have any private schools, that section will be NA in the diagnostic. Okay, so you don't have to upload the checklist 22, that'll be an NA in the diagnostic. Okay. The next question, if we don't have any Title I preschools, do we fill out this part or should it be indicated as NA? And again, that section will be an NA for you all as well. Okay. Next question. Will all federal programs uploads for federal programs be in Part 1 of COGNIA? Yes, that is correct. So they will be in Part 1 of COGNIA. That's something new that they are doing this year. In the previous years, it was just all one kind of document. This year, they kind of separated those.
For the technical assistance document and EGAP, yes, we will supply you with a copy of the checklist, today's presentation as well. Once Dr. Killingsworth approves the video recording of this, we will release that video as well. But I wanted to share a screenshot in the chat of the location and EGAP of where you can find those compliance monitoring materials. So if you are having any issues locating that, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to help you.
Here, our next question says, do we upload the qualification documentation for every 101 instructional parapro or only parapros paid by Title I funds? So if they're paid with Title I funds and they're 101, which is instructional, yes, or if they're in a Title I school. So if they're in a Title I school and paid with other funds and they're instructional, we need to see that documentation for them as well.
Will the required Form 1 continuation of compensation during COVID closures be used? So technically, that was one of the updates this summer. So that form is non-applicable for you all. So you do not have to provide any documentation for that. So that's actually a component 1.6 in common compliance, financial and compensation management. So in that component 1.6, you do not have to provide any documentation for that. All right. All right, so that was all the questions in the chat. If you all have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask your question. If not, you type it in the chat as well.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Great. In the area of, in Section 2, common compliance about procurement policies and procedures,
Yes,
where it speaks to contracts.
Yes, ma'am.
If you are high risk, you should provide 4 examples. Will you all ask us for specific contracts, or do we just pull any 4 and provide you?
Well, you can pull basically what we're looking for is different things, right? So for the high risk LEAs, we're looking for competitive procurement, right? So we're looking to see a non-construction, a construction, and a telecommunication services contract, right? If you have those, right? So we're looking to see those. Also, too, from a oversight of contractor standpoint, we're looking to see those different oversight of contracts. So that's those purchase orders, right? Those 4 purchase orders. Now, those could be anything that you all select, right? But those need to provide that segregation of duties, right? So we need to see that with those purchase orders. And basically that's saying, if I'm a federal programs director and I signed off on the purchase order, I have somebody coming probably after me to sign off on that as well, right? Which could be the superintendent, right? Could be a CSFO, just depending on how everything, the workflow works in your LEA. So that's typically how we look at that process.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any more questions? Feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself and ask your question. So if nobody has a question, I'll talk about just some golden nuggets, right? So just kind of going through the monitoring process, right? What are some of the things that we need to look at, right? How do we navigate the process, right? So initially, I think my first step would be just kind of getting the team together, right? So getting that key person there, right? So if that's a CSFO, if that's a curriculum person, if that's an EL person, right? I want to get the team members involved that will basically support me in this process, right? And if it's kind of just passing out different spreadsheets, right? You're responsible for this spreadsheet, you're responsible for this, right? And just kind of making them clearly understand exactly what's expected, what they need to provide. From that standpoint, it's kind of gathering the documentation, right? So I'm gathering documentation. I will go ahead and start submitting that documentation early, right? It's not a situation where we have to get everything at once and then submit everything at once, right? You can do it piece by piece, right? So if you have, right, financial and compensation management first, if you have that documentation first, go ahead and submit that, right? So I would go through a process where we allow the time to be on our side, right? So follow those deadlines. So when we say we're going into copy to assess the documentation at that 3-week check, right? When we go in, we want to make sure that you all have everything there, right? Because it allows you all to have more time on the back end. Because once we go through that documentation check and go through those budget analysis reports, we go through those detailed general ledgers, right? Sometimes there might be issues with those, and we might have to have a back and forth with you all, right? So, for example, if you are having an issue with Title I, right, the budget analysis report, right? As we go through that bar and we see those things, then we'll let you know, hey, we saw this in the bar, right? So, function code, object code 1100, 400, that didn't match what you all have in EGAP, right? So you all need to fix that. So we'll send that information back to you all, and then you all can fix it. Also, too, with those detailed general ledger reports, when you provide that to us, we go in and we select expenditures, right? So for each fund source, we'll select expenditures. We'll send it back to you in that second week email, and then you will provide the documentation, right? So if you're late getting the information in, so when we go in a 3-week check, and there are no detailed general ledgers, there are no budget analysis reports, that puts you all behind on the back end as far as time concerns, right? So we just want to make sure that you all have the time on your side, right? We want to make sure that you all have the support you need, right? So go ahead and start getting the documentation in early. Use us as a resource, right? Call us if you have any questions or concerns. Reach out to us. Hey, Errol, just thinking about this. What do you think, right? Am I on the right track, right? So whatever we have to do to support you all, we will, right? So we are more than able to support you all as you go through this process. And then it's a back and forth, right? So as we kind of just go through the weeks, the goal is to, we'll start probably a long list, and we just want to, each week, every day, we want to just kind of cut down that list. So when we get down to the monitoring week, hopefully we had a process where we have cleared everything, right? And if we cleared everything, the closeout process is simple, right? So that's some of the things I think you all need to look at. As far as documentation, those financials are key, right? So the budget analysis reports, again, like I talked about, the details in the ledgers, the gross employee salary report in the Excel document, right? The inventory spreadsheet, right? So those are items, once you send to us, we assess, and then it might be some feedback for you all where you have to make additional adjustments or changes, all right? Any golden nuggets that you all can think of as well? Okay. So again, if you all don't have any other questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to us whenever you need. We will have an office hour session Tuesday. We'll have an AM and a PM session. So over the weekend, if you're doing your planning and you kind of think about certain questions, some concerns may arise, during that office hour session, you can get those addressed, right? So feel free to use us as a resource, ask the questions. We are truly here to help you all and partner with you all as you go through this process, right? The goal is not to say, hey, we caught you doing something wrong, right? So our goal is to truly support you all, partner with you all as you go through this process. And it's reflective, right? So we go through this process, we develop, we learn, and we get better. And some areas might be problematic, right? We help you all become more efficient in those areas, right? And then again, too, like we said before, those areas where you perform well, we want to highlight and share that good news, not only at an LEA level, a state level, but share with other LEAs as well. So that is our process. And again, we we are excited to go through this monitoring process with you all. And we are excited to support you all as you kind of gather this documentation and go through the monitoring process. So if you all don't have any other questions or concerns for us, again, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you all in our office hour session on Tuesday. Thank you all.